Alright, Magic 8 Ball. Will today's intro be funny? Give me an answer. Consult me later. Magic 8 Ball. Will today's intro be funny? The stars say no. What is going on, guys? So today we are back with another deep dive, diving deeper into the Jungle Cup, and holy cow, this update has had a huge disruption on a lot of different Pokemon that are featured in the Jungle Cup. And today we're actually going to be taking a deep dive into one of those Pokemon that has recently just propelled itself into new heights with the new very fast move Charm, which of course it's in the thumbnail. It's in I don't know why I try to build this up every video. So today we're talking about Wigglytuff, which is a normal and fairy type Pokemon, maxing out at level 40 with 15s across the board at 1926, which is very respectable for the Great League, I have to say. Then we do have a 0 on attack, 15 defense, and 12 stamina at level 30. You can actually hit a 1499, which does keep us in the Great League, which actually ends up having the greatest stat product available according to our stats here. Of course, according to my spreadsheets and all the numbers that I have ran, Wigglytuff is 30th in bulk and 22nd in stat product. Very, very good there. And of course, all of this does come from our base stats, starting with a 156 on attack, a 90 in defense, and a 295 in stamina, which is insanely high. Now, that defense stat is rather low, but it's whatever. We've got the HP to back up what we don't have in defense. It'd be alright. So now looking into our moves, this is of course going to be the big talk. Charm, since it's been added, definitely is going to be a very interesting move that a lot of people looking into are going to definitely want to decide whether they want to run basically Razor Leaf on a fairy type Pokemon, because essentially the stats boil down very, very similarly between Razor Leaf and Charm here. Razor Leaf does inch out just a tad bit in damage per turn, but either way, they're very, very similar, and they will perform very, very similar in a real world scenario. But to give fairness to all of Wigglytuff's old moves, let's actually go through. We do have Pound and Feint Attack are the old moves that we're, if you haven't guessed, we're not going to use those. Energy per turn. Pound gaining 2 energy per turn, 2.5 damage per turn. It does get stab and does get bumped up to 3 damage per turn. Okay, Feint Attack does have 3 energy per turn for 3 damage per turn. No stab because we're not dark type. Okay. Charm here though, 2 energy per turn for 5 1/3 damage per turn after stab and a little bit of rounding. It does get bumped up to 6.4 damage per turn, which is huge. That's crazy high, and oh my gosh. Okay, so you are gonna sacrifice an energy per turn. And with only 2 energy per turn, that does end up meaning that we're basically gonna rely so much on Charm that we're hardly ever gonna actually get to our charge moves. And if we do get to them, we're probably only actually gonna get to use possibly one charge move in a real life scenario before we end up fainting. So let's keep that in mind whenever we talk about our charge moves here. So our first charge move is going to be Dazzling Gleam. For 70 energy, we get 110 damage at a 1.57. We do get a stab bonus here, which makes it a 132 on damage for a 1.88 on the damage per energy ratio. Hyper Beam here for 80 energy, we get 150 damage at a 1.88. After stab, it does get bumped up to 180 on the damage for a 2.25. Definitely our most efficient move there. Then we do have Play Rough here. For 60 energy, we get 90 damage at a 1.5. After stab, it does get bumped up to 108 for a 1.80 on our damage per energy ratio. And last but not least, our only non-stab charge move here. 55 energy for Ice Beam, 90 damage at a 1.64. So straight away, I possibly could see some merit to running either Dazzling Gleam or Hyper Beam. But you would have to be a very big gambling man, and you would have to say your reasoning would be possibly that you hope to use Wigglytuff in a situation where you only ever have to use your charge move when there are no shields in the equation. Which I would say that is a great plan, but it's still very risky. The fact that we do have both Ice Beam and Play Rough at only 55 and 60 energy respectively, those are probably going to be your best bet. Those are going to be the safest options to go with, because at 2 energy per turn, getting to play rough is still going to take 15 seconds, right? 15. So 2 energy per 60 to fire, which actually ends up meaning 30 turns, and 2 turns happen every second, so 30 divided by 2 is 15 seconds. Holy cow! That's a long time just to get to play rough. Of course, Ice Beam will be just a tad bit faster, but there are a ton of Pokemon that already die in less than 15 seconds. So you're gonna be kind of scarce on using your charge moves. You possibly will get off 1 play rough. You could possibly get off, I mean, I would say in some rare situations, if you're resisting damage coming in, possibly you could get off 2 Ice Beams, but that's going to be a rare occurrence. I definitely think that you probably want to stick to Play Rough and Ice Beam, just as a general sense, and that's definitely what the moveset that we're going to be running with today. So with our first shield scenario, we do have the 0 versus 0 up against the entire cup here, which is actually going to be a 49.3%. That's not too shabby. It doesn't actually hit that 50%, which is what I'm usually looking for there, but still 49.3 is rather close. Next we move into our 2 versus 0, which is where I have both shields this time, but my opponent doesn't have any. We actually end up winning 92.5% of these. But I'm actually not too concerned about the ones that we win against. I'm concerned if we have 2 shields, which Pokemon still can end up beating us. There's 4 Pokemon that show up in this list: Victory Bell, Weepin' Bell, Roselia, and Scizor, which is quite interesting, but all of those kind of make sense once you look at our typing. We do have a weakness to poison type moves, and since we're fairy, we're gonna do a resisted amount of damage up against the steel typing. So Scizor actually has a little bit of help there, while the poison types just kind of run rampant on us, and that's kind of gonna be a theme to this video. Next we have the 0 versus 2, which is where this time I don't have any shields, but my opponent has 2 shields. We actually end up with a 45.5. Holy cow. So if you remember back in the Heracross deep dive, I actually talked about how that 0 versus 2, Heracross actually ends up winning a little over 20% of those matchups, which I said at the time was an insanely high number. And then it was left in the comments of that video that Alolan Graveler is even higher than that, which I should have known. I had already done a video on that, but duh. 27% I'm pretty sure is around where Alolan Graveler, and I think Alolan Golem also sits right around there as well. But Wigglytuff just blows that completely out of the water now. 45.5% is the highest that I've seen, and I'm pretty sure that's going to be the highest that ends up in the entire cup. But with that shield scenario, I actually do kind of want to know which Pokemon we still end up beating here with that 0 versus 2. And it's because it's such an insane amount of Pokemon, there's no way to narrow this down. The common theme that I can see against most of these Pokemon is that they're just kind of, in general, less bulky than our Wigglytuff. And considering once we give the opponent 2 shields, it kind of just depends on how bulky they are and how long they can withstand this insane damage from charge to begin with. So after you get over that initial shock, it's like, oh, okay, basically they don't have the stats to keep up. If they have 2 shields but they don't have any chance to use them because they don't have the stats to stay alive long enough because of charm, they just auto lose. So it does make a lot of sense that we have such an insanely high number, but that of course is all thanks to the damage coming from charm. Our last shield scenario here is the 2 versus 2, which is an 85.8%, which is quite impressive. That's actually getting up there and even above the Vigoroth numbers, which is pretty crazy to think about. Vigoroth was around 69, 70%, somewhere around there. So Wigglytuff is just blowing this guy out of the water. So let's actually take a look at some of the typings against our Wigglytuff and see kind of how we do here. So over in PvPoke, what we're actually going to do is set up our Wigglytuff here with Charm, Ice Beam, Play Rough, just like we talked about. Give ourselves 1 shield. We're going to do a multi-battle up against the entire Jungle Cup, and we're going to have 1 shield for them just for some evenness here. Once we hit battle, you can see we do have a 79.1% win ratio here. So in a scenario where both Pokemon have 1 shield, which is pretty likely in a lot of tournament scenarios, Wigglytuff is still quite in line with the numbers that we've already talked about. The 0 versus 0 was a 49.3, the 1 versus 1 is a 79.1, and the 2 versus 2 goes even higher at an 85.8. So let's actually get into some of these. So up against the bug type Pokemon here, you can already see that we're putting up some really high battle ratings here. Beautifly, Pineco, Krigatune, Pinsir, and Heracross are actually going to be our easiest matchups in the bugs. If we scroll all the way down to kind of get an idea of what we lose up against, you'll see Ariados, Venomoth, Scizor, Beedrill, Dustox, and Forretress. Now there's a common theme against a lot of these Pokemon. Ariados, Venomoth, and Beedrill, and Dustox actually, all end up having some access to the poison typing, which ends up being a huge problem for us considering the fairy typing is going to be weak to the poison typing. But then we also have Scizor and Forretress, the resisting masters here. So both Scizor and Forretress do resist a ton of our damage. Even though we have an insanely high damage output with Charm, it's being hindered here because we actually don't have quick access to the charge moves that aren't fairy type that will actually in turn hurt the steel typing here as well. So we kind of end up having a really big exposed weakness right there, which is a kind of a problem up against the steel typing. So both Scizor and Forretress do really well. Next we have our electric typing, which as you can see here, we do already put up some insanely high numbers. Manectric, Ampharos, Flappy, Luxio, and Luxray all being the ones that are our easiest possible matchups. If we scroll all the way down to the bottom, we can actually see we have 4 losses here. Lantern, Magnemite, Magnezone, and Magneton. So the Lantern one is quite interesting for me. Lantern is a pretty bulky Pokemon as it is, and it actually, since it's not Razor Leaf this time, we're not actually taking a huge amount of damage per fast move, and we don't pretty much just get deleted. So we still do take quite a bit of damage, but because Lantern is so bulky already, we are able to accept a lot of that damage while still being able to output a ton of damage ourselves. Now, Magnemite, Magnezone, and Magneton, kind of a similar story to Forretress and Scizor. Basically, the Steel Boys are going to give us a lot of problems here because they are going to resist a ton of our damage, while they're able to at least deal some neutral damage or possibly even some big damage right back to us. So, the electric typing, still looking pretty great. Next, we actually have the grass typing here, and as you can see up at the very top, we do have the Alolan Exeggutor, which makes a lot of sense. We do have Tangela, Carnivine, Breloom, and Cacturne rounding out the top 5 easiest matchups with our Wigglytuff here. If we go all the way down to the bottom, we actually have quite a few losses here. We actually have 12 in total inside of the grass typing. So let's start from our hardest matchup being Bayleaf. We are still going to lose that matchup, but it's a really hard fought one. Bayleaf actually has quite a bit of bulk to it, and it's able to do a lot of neutral damage, and it ends up being neutral damage versus neutral damage in a lot of situations. Bayleaf does not carry that poison typing, so it ends up kind of being a neutral versus neutral matchup, and Bayleaf's stats just end up helping it out a lot more than ours do. So then we have Oddish, Vileplume, Jumpluff, Weepinbell, Meganium, Roselia, Tangrowth, Gloom, Victreebel, Venusaur, and Ivysaur rounding out the bottom. So you can kind of see there's a common theme amongst a bunch of these as well. A lot of them have some sort of ties to poison typing here again. Venusaur, Ivysaur, Victreebel, Gloom, all are big poison type users, and they're all going to be able to just either they're going to be able to hit us with Razor Leaf, which is an insanely hard hitting neutral damage move to begin with, or they're going to be able to hit us with enough fast moves to get to a poison type move, which is going to be really devastating to us either way. So the grass types, it's basically, there's a big problem with the poison types, and there's a couple of others like Tangrowth, Meganium, and Bayleaf that are kind of sprinkled in here as well, but basically the grass type is still looking really strong for us. I mean, only 12 losses is a great number to put up. Last but not least, we do have the normal typing, and as you see, Slacking generally showing up here at the top. We do have Zangoose, Raticate, Baneri, Staravia, and Licky rounding out the top ones that we do really, really well up against. If we scroll all the way down to the bottom to see our losses, we actually don't have any losses. We tie up against ourselves, which is to be expected, but then Miltank, Munchlax, Vigoroth, and Noctowl are some of our hardest possible matchups to go up against. Yeah. Noctowl and Vigoroth, the two that I claimed. Vigoroth, of course, king of the jungle. He has been since day one. Noctowl, I said that was like the apprentice. He's the prince. He's the bishop, the rook, whatever. I'm just naming chess pieces again. Basically, Noctowl is like the number 2, and he beats both of them. Like, that's crazy. Wigglytuff beats both Noctowl and Vigoroth, which is an insanely high feat to come over, and that is just freaking amazing. So now let's actually talk a little bit about the meta-relevant Pokemon here. These are outlined by PvPoke. There's top 22 meta-relevant Pokemon. After this video goes live, it actually may change. Wigglytuff may kind of get a shoe-in, depending on how the Silph Arena wants to handle this. I really do hope that they don't like just ban Wigglytuff. I really hope that they don't ban Charm. I understand it if they do, but I mean, things change, things happen. Just like Niantic drops an event on a tournament day, they don't give us any leeway on how to handle that. This is kind of a similar situation here. I really hope that they don't, but I will understand if they do. So in our first shield scenario up against the top 22 meta-relevant Pokemon, we do have a 36.4%, which is okay up against the meta. I mean, I was really expecting a little bit higher of a number there, but when both persons' shields are down, that's not really when we shine here. Then we do have the 1 versus 0, which is a 68.2%, which is fairly nice. And of course, that's kind of okay. It's a little bit less impressive than the entire cup there, where it was a 92.5, but still quite good. Now the big one though is the 0 versus 1, which is where we don't have any shields, but our opponent actually is going to be able to use 1. We actually end up winning a 31.8, which is quite insane. And the fact that it's that high really just goes to show you that Charm just outputs so much freaking damage. It's quite crazy how much damage that Charm is actually going to be able to output here. Next last but not least, we do have the 1 versus 1, which is a 54.5%. So we do actually hit more than 50% of our matchups in the 1v1, which let's actually take a look at those. So back here in PvPoke, we do have our Wigglytuff set up with Charm, Ice Beam, Play Rough, just like before. We have 1 shield for ourselves, 1 shield for our opponent. We are going to do those 22 meta-relevant Pokemon. Currently, as of recording, I don't see Wigglytuff in the list. So let's hit battle. As you can see, that 1v1 does end up with a 54.5% win ratio there. And if we look through these Pokemon, you can actually see at the very top here, we do have Heracross, Breloom, Scyther, Raichu, Masquerain, Golem, Vespiquen, Graveler, Cradily, Pidgeot, Noctowl, Vigoroth, and then we do lose up against the Lantern, which makes our first loss. So out of those wins, Heracross and Breloom are going to be pretty weak to the Fairy typing there. Scyther, Raichu, Masquerain, not going to really have a whole lot to be able to put up against us. We're just going to basically outpace them in damage. Golem, Vespiquen, Graveler, Cradily, all those are kind of in a similar scenario. Pidgeot, Noctowl, and Vigoroth though, they actually keep up with a lot of our damage, and in some real world scenarios, depending on what kind of energy you have stored up, if you've been switching, if you've been playing through the game, it will definitely go a little bit different. But in this situation where both Pokemon dead start on 0 with everything except 1 shield for each Pokemon, we still end up beating all Pidgeot, Noctowl, and Vigoroth, which is huge. So in terms of our losses here, we do have Lantern, Scizor, Venomoth, Magnezone, Victreebel, Magneton, Ivysaur, Beedrill, Fortress, and Venusaur. And there's kind of a common theme here. We've already talked about Lantern, which is still very true in this scenario. Super amounts of bulk, able to hit us for a ton of neutral damage that we just can't kind of outpace it there. Scizor, gonna carry that steel typing for resistance. Venomoth, if it has access to Poison Fang, it's definitely gonna be in a really good position here. I kind of do want to see if we take Poison Fang away from it, how it actually ends up performing. So if we just give it, I don't know, let's just say Psychic. Silver Wind is definitely going to be, the quicker move there. If it doesn't have Poison Fang, it still can actually end up winning, which is pretty crazy. So even though you don't have Poison Fang, Venomoth could be a decent check to your actual Wigglytuff counter there. So pretty interesting that we still have that check even though we don't have the Legacy Poison Fang. Then again, we do have our Magneton and Magnezone showing up here. Both of those we've already talked about. Steel Boy is going to have a ton of typing issues there. Victreebel and Ivysaur both show up here, which make a lot of sense considering that they do carry that poison typing, and any poison type moves that get thrown at us are going to be really, really hurtful. Beedrill kind of also falls into that along with Venusaur as well. Either of those hitting us with any kind of poison type damage is going to be pretty devastating. And then Fortress, like we've already talked about, it's going to be able to resist a ton of our damage with its steel typing. So we end up just having some pretty clear-cut losses, but we have some pretty interesting wins too. I mean, the ones that everybody seems to be pretty worried about, Noctowl and Vigoroth, definitely pretty large and in charge that we beat them here. So all in all, I would say this update has propelled Wigglytuff to an insanely high pedestal to live up to. If anyone's tournament happens to be this week, or if it happens to be this weekend, probably at the latest, people that haven't kind of been keeping up with the news, people that possibly aren't aware that Wigglytuff is going to have charm, they probably are going to get steamrolled. There's always these threads on Reddit, and it's like this week's review of the meta or whatever, and it shows how many winning teams use specific Pokemon. I always love to read through those. I definitely expect Wigglytuff to make a huge appearance here, and I'll be very excited to see that. But that is actually going to be it for Wigglytuff, guys. I definitely think that you should try it out. Thank you to everyone in the Discord who has been submitting footage for me to put up in the background while we go over these deep dives. Of course, I will show you, this is what we have coming up next. I did kind of move Manectric completely out of the way to make this happen, but I'm sorry, Manectric fans. We will get to him. He will be tomorrow's deep dive, I swear. But that is actually going to be it for today, guys. I'm just going to go ahead and roll that in-screen footage. Well, you've made it to the end of the video. Thank you guys so much for hanging out. Thank you so much for watching. Of course, if you do have any ideas for content, please drop them down in the comments below. I'll be happy to look at those for you guys. Of course, if you want to join my personal Discord, get to talking to some people that have a similar outlook as myself, definitely go down into the description, join that Discord there. If you want to become a Patreon, there is a link down in the description for that as well. My outlook on Patreon is I don't want to put anything behind a paywall. This is what I do. You guys get every bit of what I make, and I don't want to limit that to someone else just because they can't pay for something. I didn't think that was fair. If you want to be a Patreon, just know that you're literally doing it from the kindness of your heart, wanting to support me, and I appreciate that. You don't even understand how much. There are a couple of other options if you would like to join the community here on YouTube. It's very similar to a Twitch-like subscription where it's a dollar amount per month depending on where you live, and then that monthly fee basically gets funneled to me every month, and you do get a couple of special perks here on YouTube like some badges and some emojis or whatever. I honestly think those are only for live streaming, so that may not be the way that most people want to go, but that's an option if you want to. Other than that, if you'd like to follow me on Twitter, that link is actually going to be down in the description as well. And until our next video, guys, that should be it. Thank you so much for watching and hanging out. And until our next video, I will catch you then.